we're back on the air. We'd say to the public who's watching that we will reconvene our session just momentarily. We are leaving executive session and we will report on what happened during that executive session. And then we'll give the concluding reports that are due today from JLARC. All right, everyone back, Nathan, as far as you know?
Let's see. The next presenter, I think, is going to be Ellen. I don't think she's back yet.
Members are back, however. Members are still.
Oh, yes, she is. Okay.
So the chair recognizes Senator Howe for purpose of a motion.
I move the following resolution. Whereas JLARC convened a closed meeting on this date pursuant to an affirmative recorded vote and in accordance with the provisions of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act. And whereas Section 2.2-3712 of the Code of Virginia requires a certification by this committee that such closed meeting was conducted in conformity with Virginia law. Now therefore be it resolved that the commission certifies that to the best of each member's knowledge, 1, only public business matters lawfully exempted from open meeting requirements under this chapter were discussed in the closed meeting to which the certification resolution applies. And 2, only such public business matters as were identified in the motion by which the closed meeting was convened were heard, discussed, or considered by the committee.
Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Second.
Okay, seconded by Senator McPike. This will require a recorded vote. Mr. Clerk, would you call the roll?
Yes, indeed. Delegate Austin.
Aye.
Delegate Carr.
Aye.
Speaker Fillicorn.
Aye.
Delegate Cox.
Aye.
Leader Herring.
Aye.
Senator Howell.
Aye.
Senator Locke.
Aye.
Senator Monet.
Aye.
Senator McPike.
Aye.
Delegate Orrock.
Aye.
Delegate Plum.
Aye.
Delegate Sickles.
Aye.
Senator Spruill.
Aye.
And Delegate Torrey.
Aye.
Thank you, everyone.
The business conducted in the special session related to certain personnel action. And I need now a motion that Hal Greer be reappointed as JLARC Director for a term of 6 years, subject to confirmation by the General Assembly. Delegate
Second.
Carr moves, and we need a second.
Second.
Second from Senator Norman. We have to have a recorded vote if the clerk would call the roll.
All right. Delegate Austin.
Aye.
Delegate Carr.
Aye.
Speaker Fillicorn.
Aye.
Delegate Cox.
Aye.
Leader Herring.
Aye.
Senator Howell.
Aye.
Senator Locke.
Aye.
Senator Normand.
Aye.
Senator McPike.
Aye.
Delegate Orrock.
Aye.
Delegate Plum.
Aye.
Delegate Sickles.
Aye.
Senator Spruill.
No.
And Delegate Torrey.
Aye.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, the motion passes. We need now, as a second item of business conducted in the special session, to agree to a motion. I move that Stacy Henshaw be recommended for appointment as Auditor of Public Accounts for a term of 4 years, subject to election by the General Assembly. Who would like to move that motion?
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
The Delegate
Second.
Pike moves, and Delegate Sickles seconds. We will have to have a roll call. Mr. Clerk.
All right. Delegate Austin.
Aye.
Delegate Carr.
Aye.
Speaker Fillicorn.
Aye.
Delegate Cox.
Aye.
Leader Herring.
Aye.
Senator Howell.
Aye.
Senator Locke.
Aye.
Senator North.
Aye.
Senator McPike.
Aye.
Delegate Orrock.
Aye.
Delegate Plum.
Aye.
Delegate Sickles.
Aye.
Senator Spruill.
Aye.
Delegate Torrey.
Aye.
Thank you.
That motion passes. Thank you very much. How we're back to our regular agenda, and I would say, in the interest of time, if members of the staff could be brief. These are oversight kind of reports. We have also written documentation for those people who are watching. And I might say also to people who are watching that these reports appear on our website this afternoon as the reports are received by the commission. The next report is the Economic Development Incentives Report. Ellen, are you here?
I am. How are you going to say a few words?
Why don't you, Ellen, we'll just, for the sake of time, why don't we just let you launch right in and just share that this is an annual report that we do, please.
Okay.
So, okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Chairman Plum and Howe. Good morning. My name is Ellen Miller, and I will present the key findings very quickly from our 4th annual report on economic development incentives. This report includes high-level information on incentives that were awarded during the 10-year period from fiscal year 11 to fiscal year 19. This slide just covers our mandate. This slide highlights our key findings, and just briefly, I'll point out that total spending over the 10-year period was $2.7 billion on incentives, mostly for tax incentives. But we did find that grants have a higher economic benefit than tax incentives. Another key point, grant awards increased substantially in fiscal year 19 because of several custom grant awards, namely the $750 million custom grant for Amazon. My next 4 slides cover spending on incentives. And slide 4 shows the $2.7 billion broken out by type of incentive. And as you can see, the majority of spending was for tax incentives, mostly sales and use tax exemptions. One thing I do want to point out really quickly is that grants is your next large bucket of incentive spending. The custom awards have not affected this bucket yet because they have not started payouts of those awards. Slide 5 lists the 10 largest incentives in terms of spending. The largest is by far the data center exemption, and it represents nearly 1/4 of total spending on incentives. The next largest is the Coalfield Employment Enhancement Tax Credit. This slide just shows a trend over time in terms of spending, and you'll see spending has generally increased over time, and there are a couple of years where you see spikes in spending, and I'll cover that on this slide, which just shows spending on tax incentives. And as you can see, there's a bump up in fiscal 13 and fiscal 15. Part of that is because of the data center exemption, which 76 million in spending in fiscal year 13 and 92 million in fiscal year 15, and the there's two coal tax credits. The coal production and employment incentive tax credit, about 59 million in carryover credits were claimed in 1 year, and that was fiscal year 13, and that helped the spike up in spending in that year. Now I'll switch gears from spending to grant awards. As you can see, grant awards were fairly stable between fiscal year 10 and fiscal year 18. And then there was a 10-fold increase in fiscal year 19 because of several large custom grant awards. One was because of Amazon. There was also a 70 million custom grant award to Micron and a 10.5 million grant award to Amazon Web Services that year. And again, those grants haven't affected spending yet. This slide just shows the largest grant awards over the 10-year period. You can see that 3 custom grants are on this slide, and I've highlighted those in a blue circle. And you can see that Amazon by far makes up about half of the total award amount. In terms of characteristics of businesses receiving grants, this slide just shows that nearly a third of grant awards were to businesses with less than 100 employees. And of that group, about half had less than 25 employees. This slide focuses on completed grant projects and shows that these projects created more than 78,000 jobs and made nearly 18 billion in capital investments. The 2 largest programs in terms of jobs and investment are programs administered by VEDP. It's the VGIP and the COF program. One thing just to keep in mind is that businesses consider many factors other than incentives when making location and expansion decisions. And also that research on incentives suggests that only a small portion of the jobs that were created in the capital that was invested by the incentive recipients can be attributed to the incentives themselves. The majority would have occurred without the incentives. This slide just quickly covers goal achievement of completed projects. As you can see on the slide, about 2/3 of projects achieved their capital investment goals. Nearly over a quarter achieved their job creation goals, and nearly half achieved their wage goals. This slide I want to spend the most time on because we only provide this information every other year. And this slide will cover our high-level findings on the economic benefits and returns in revenue by type of incentive. We focus on economic benefits as a ratio of benefits to spending so that programs can be easily compared, but there is much more detail in the written report. As I go through the slide, you will see how the benefits vary by program, and I'll start with grants. Here we estimated that for every 1 million spent on grant awards, 132 jobs, 23 million in state GDP, and 13 million in personal income are added to the economy each year because of the grants. We also estimate that for every $1 spent on grants, the state receives 84 cents in state revenue. Again, I just want to point out again that these estimates are adjusted for the assumption that only a small portion of the economic benefits and return in revenue can be attributed to the incentives. Next, I'll turn to tax incentives, and you see that their economic benefits and returns are estimated to be less than the benefits and returns for grant programs, particularly tax credits, which by far have the lowest benefits with an estimated 11 jobs and 1 million in state GDP added to the economy for every 1 million spent. There are a couple reasons why grants have higher economic benefits and returns in revenue than tax incentives. One is because grants are targeted to export-based or tradable industries that sell the majority of their goods outside of the state, which means they bring in new revenue into the state economy. Manufacturer single sales apportionment is one exception to this. That's a tax incentive. And it does, as you can see, have higher benefits than other tax incentives. And that's because this incentive is targeted to manufacturers, which are export-based. Grant programs also typically have minimum job creation and capital investment requirements, while most tax incentives do not. However, there is one exception, and that's the data center exemption. And as you may recall, that is Virginia's largest incentive, and it is really driving the higher economic benefits and returns in revenue that you see for exemptions on this slide. This last line just shows when you average it across all incentives. And one point I'll make before leaving this slide is that the loan and gap financing programs actually have the highest economic benefits. But really, there isn't much in terms of spending on these incentives. The biggest amount of spending is, the biggest section of incentives here are the loans. And as you may recall from our 2018 report, the only time there's a cost to the state is if there's a default on the loan. Mr. Chairman, this slide just reiterates our key findings, and that concludes my prepared remarks, but I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Your questions or discussion on part of the commission members? Hearing none, do I have a motion that the report be received?
So moved.
So moved by Douglas Carr. Is there a second?
Second.
Second.
Senator McPike. All those in favor of receiving the report will say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
The motion is agreed to. Hal?
And I'd like to turn things over to Jamie Bitts.
Yeah, next will be Jamie Best to give our VRS report in a very brief manner. Thanks, Jamie.
Perfect.
Well, good morning, Mr. Chairman. I will be fairly brief in my presentation. I'll give you a brief version of JLARC's semi-annual report on VRS. And I'll skip ahead to the most important slides. The financial assets used to pay VRS benefits are pooled in the VRS Trust Fund. That is a core responsibility of VRS to manage the investments of those assets. The fund's investments achieved a 5.3% return for the one-year period ending on September 30th. And at that time, the fund held a little bit more than $85 billion in assets. And that is an increase of $2.4 billion compared to the same time last year. The table on slide 5 just gives you some additional detail on the trust fund's overall performance. As of September 30th, the performance was slightly below the benchmarks for the 1, 3, and 5-year periods. As you can see at the far right of the table, the total fund returns exceeded the benchmarks for the 10 and 25-year periods, and then returns for the 5 and 10 and 25-year periods exceeded the 6.75% that VRS is assuming it will achieve over the long term. This table, Mr. Chairman, just shows you a breakdown of returns for the different asset classes, which are listed from largest to smallest. Across all of the asset classes, performance compared to the benchmarks was relatively mixed. Public equity underperformed all of its benchmarks for the period ending on September 30th of this year. That was largely due to underperformance of its value strategies. And the public equity program has missed its 1, 3, and 5-year period benchmarks for the period ending September 30th last year and then March 30th of this year. And so this is a trend of underperforming benchmarks that we are watching closely through our oversight. In terms of the other asset classes, fixed income assets exceeded their benchmarks. Performance was more mixed with credit strategies and more positive with real assets and private equity. And then finally, the multi-asset public strategies and private investment partnerships missed their benchmarks. As in past years, VRS did provide incentive pay and bonuses to its staff for fiscal year 20. The board approved $4.5 million in additional compensation. 3/4 of that went to investment professionals based on their performance and then the performance of the assets that they are managing. I'll take just a couple of minutes, Mr. Chairman, to talk about trust fund rates and funding. Slide 8 shows you the required employer contribution rates for the teachers plan and the state employees plan. You can see on the far right of the slide that the rates adopted in last year's budget increased for both plans, and that was because VRS lowered its long-term rate of return assumption. The FY21 and 22 rates shown here were certified last year. In off years, the VRS actuary calculates rates for informational purposes, and the informational rates that were calculated this year were all slightly higher than last year, but that may change going forward next year when the rates are certified. The funded status of the VRS plans is a good indicator of their overall health. Funded status of the teachers and state employees plans did decrease slightly between FY18 and 19, and that was because VRS adopted the new and lower long-term rate of return assumption. This slide just shows you that the funded status of those plans is staying about the same in FY20, and that's despite the relatively lower investment returns. I'm happy to note that contributions to the teachers and state employee plans that were deferred 10 years ago after the Great Recession are due to be repaid at the end of FY22. State employee plan deferred contributions were fully repaid in the 2016 and 2018 biennium, and then a final installment of $61 million in deferred contributions will be made to the teachers plan next year. And Mr. Chairman, I'll wrap up with just one slide on the hybrid plan. We regularly update JLARC on the voluntary contribution rates of hybrid plan members. As many of you know, every 3 years, there is an automatic 0.5% escalation in the voluntary contributions of hybrid plan members. The most recent automatic escalation occurred in January of 2020. And as a result of that, the percentage of hybrid plan members making voluntary contributions increased to 79%. Mr. Chairman, that's a very abbreviated version of the presentation, but I'm certainly happy to answer any questions there may be.
Members, you have more detail in your report that was mailed to us. This is one of our oversight responsibilities as a commission. Do we have questions or discussion? Hearing none, then do we have a motion that we receive the report?
So
So
moved.
moved,
Mr.
Chair.
Second.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll turn it back over to Ellen Miller. She'll talk to you about our annual update on state spending on the standards of quality.
And before you do that, we'll say all those in favor of the motion to receive the report on VRS oversight will say aye.
Aye.
Those say no. The report is received. And now we'll go to Ellen Miller for K-12 spending report. Al, are we okay on moving forward?
Yep.
I think it's coming here. Ellen, if you can't bring it up, just share your findings verbally if you can.
No, I got it. I had to wait for it to clear from Jamie's presentation first.
There it is.
Okay. Thank you, Jamie. I'm back, and I'll just give you a very brief overview of our state spending on K through 12 SOQ report. Annual reports on SOQ are mandated by the Code of Virginia. The main thing to keep in mind is that DOE reports on local SOQ spending. This particular report that we're required to do focuses on state SOQ spending. This slide just is a reminder that the state and localities share the cost of meeting the SOQs. And there are several factors here listed on this slide. The key ones are here. That really drive SOQ spending. Slide 5 shows that school divisions spent $6.3 billion in state SOQ funds in fiscal year 20. The two largest accounts are the basic aid and the account where sales tax revenue is deposited. Spending from these accounts typically go for salaries, but there is some discretion in how the funding is used. The other major categories go to employee retirement through VRS or Social Security, and also special education. Funding isn't technically provided on a per student basis, but it is often discussed that way. The $6.3 billion that I just mentioned equates to about $5,000 per student on average across all school divisions. This amount is a little bit higher than it was last year, but I do want to point out that fiscal year 20 was not a re-benchmarking year, so it's not significantly higher. And there was also an increase in enrollment between fiscal 19 and 20, whereas enrollment had declined the year before. This slide just shows that total spending in terms of, which is the line graph, has increased over time and at a fairly steady increase since fiscal year 16. The bar graph shows per student spending, and this has also generally increased, but at a somewhat slower rate. These amounts are not inflation adjusted, but SOQ spending on a per student basis was a little bit higher, about 9.5% more in fiscal year 20 than it was in fiscal year 11 when it is adjusted for inflation. Slide 8 shows the top divisions in terms of total SOQ spending. These 10 divisions account for about half of total SOQ spending. On the right-hand side, you can see there's a great deal of variation in terms of the per student amount. And this is because of localities' ability to pay, which I'll highlight a little bit more on this slide. As you see the divisions on the left, they have the lowest local composite index, which means they have the lowest ability to pay. And these also have the highest per student SOQ spending amounts. On the right-hand side, these 5 divisions have the highest possible local composite index score, and they also have the lowest per student spending amounts. And I'll just conclude my remarks with this. As you can see on the screen, that we have a section on our website through Tableau where you can click on one of these dots, and the one that's highlighted is Richmond City Public Schools, and you can see the SOQ spending amounts. For Richmond, you can compare it to other school divisions, you can look at trends over time, and you can compare it to the statewide average. There's all this information is also in Appendix B of our report. And with that, I would be glad to answer any questions that members may have.
Do members have questions of Alan? Hearing none, do we have a motion to receive the report?
Move to receive the report, Mr. Chairman.
Second, Mr. Chairman.
Speaker Philicorn seconds. All those in favor of the motion will say aye.
Aye. Aye.
No.
Aye.
The report is received. We finally have an update on Cardinal. And Jamie, I know you're going to start off reminding us what Cardinal is and then bring us up to date.
Mr. Chairman, I will give you also a very brief update on Cardinal, and I will start out by explaining what Cardinal is. In the interest of time, I'll skip ahead to a slide that tells you exactly that. Cardinal is an enterprise resource planning system, or ERP. The main benefit of ERPs is that they allow organizations to share data across different functions. In this case, the Cardinal ERP would integrate the state's financial, payroll, and HR functions into one IT system. Last year's presentation on this topic had more detail on the history of the project. I'll skip over that in the interest of time. This slide, Mr. Chairman, just shows you the total costs of the project, and I just highlight the bottom row, which shows you the total cost of $131.8 million. Mr. Chairman, probably the most important point to make is that in terms of an update on the status of the HCM project, as of this month, it is within its overall budget and schedule. There have been some delays recently, related to testing the connections between the new system and agencies, but those don't appear to be likely to delay the overall project. Longer term, this is a very large project, and there are some important risks that the General Assembly should be aware of. As I said, it is a very large project. It is highly complex, and so there is always a risk of scheduling delays and cost increases. It will also be more challenging to make sure that agencies and localities are prepared to use the new system, and that's just because training will be done remotely amid the pandemic. And finally, Mr. Chairman, there are several considerations to keep in mind for Cardinal in the future. In the interest of time, I would just point out the most important of those, which would be the need to create a permanent governance structure that can make decisions about whether and how to add new functions to Cardinal. There are several human resource functions, such as applicant tracking and recruiting and performance management, that are not part of the system. And adding or creating a permanent governance structure will be important to making decisions about when and whether to add those functions. Mr. Chairman, that's a very abbreviated version of the presentation, but I'm certainly happy to answer any questions.
Member questions or discussion on Cardinal? It is a highly complex system, but it has amazing potential for adding to the efficiency of government. So look forward to your continued updates. Are there other items to come before the commission?
Mr. Chairman, that concludes our agenda and our work for 2020. We've certainly appreciated the support and guidance of the commission in this challenging year in conducting our work, and certainly look forward to beginning the work on the new studies that you have directed to us. I wish you all a very happy and safe holiday season. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And the same to you and the staff. Do we have a motion then that the meeting be adjourned?
So
Motion
moved.
adjourned.
So moved.
All those in favor say aye. Have a good holiday.
Aye.
Stay happy and safe. Take care. Thank you
Thank you,
so much.
Mr. Chairman. Thanks, everybody.
Mr.
Thank
Chairman.
you.
Stay safe.